Welcome everyone to History 1306. I am your instructor, Dr. Joe Davey. So obviously things are starting on a bit of an unusual note here at UHD. With the COVID crisis ongoing, we've had a lot of drastic switches to the beginning of the semester and how they were going to roll out classes. And so in this very first video lecture, or sort of, I guess we could call it a video welcome at this point, to the course, I just wanted to, sort of talk about a few things as to what you can expect for how the class is going to operate, and touch base about a few key points in the syllabus, certainly all things that we will come back to at a later point in the semester, and just introduce myself and also introduce American history. I'm going to give you kind of a quick and dirty overview of what's happening up to 1877, and then talk about why that's a significant start date for our course, particularly with relation to what we are seeing going on in contemporary society. So, again, my name is Dr. Joe Davey. I am an Africanist historian by trade, so I'm not an Americanist per se. I did my PhD at Michigan State University. That's also where I did my undergrad. I received my BA in 2006, and I finished my PhD in 2015. From there, I came down to the University of Houston downtown. I believe I started here in the fall of 2016, so that makes this fall, I believe, my 5th academic year. I'm not great at math, but that sounds about right. My specialty is social mobility within indigenous African slave systems. And no, you're not going to have to remember that or even know what that's all about. But what I'm trying to point out is that I am by training an Africanist. I did my research in the UK and Nigeria. I've done archival research here in the U.S., Europe, and West Africa. I've also conducted a lot of oral interviews in southeastern Nigeria and the U.K. and a handful here in Houston as well. But I really look at the relationship between domestic slaves in Africa and the end of the Atlantic slave trade and the beginning of a period that's known as legitimate trade in African history, where they switched from exporting slaves out of Africa to exporting raw materials. And in particular, I look at the palm oil trade in the Niger Delta. And so I could go on and on and on, and at some point I probably will, but right now I'm going to leave it there. And it suffices to say that some of you might be wondering, why is an Africanist teaching an American history class? Well, my teaching fields, in addition to my research field, are general African history, world history, and American history. And so with American history, I have a particular emphasis on the African diaspora within the United States. So that's why I'm set up to teach U.S. history and to teach this part of the sequence, because to have familiarity with African American history and the African American diaspora, you also have to know the general narrative history of the U.S. Like I said, did research in the Igbo land section of Nigeria, which is like southeastern Nigeria and West Africa. I'm fluent in Igbo, and I have a functional or at least usable knowledge of West African Pidgin English. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a Michigander, born and bred. I'm from Metro Detroit originally. Like I said, moved down here to come to UHD. I did marry a native Houstonian, and we just had our first child back in April. So from time to time, if you see me in Zoom office hours or these video lectures, I might be trying to deal with a screaming baby. One or actually two other interruptions that we have. Well, one of them I can demonstrate right now. This is one of my very ill-behaved cats. This is Mr. Skeets. So he is going to pretty much universally, as soon as he hears the camera click on, he'll come sprinting from across the house and try and mess things up. There's another one floating around here too. She bites. But they will pop up from time to time, so at least you don't have to deal with any allergic reactions. Now, I think I've said enough about myself, but in this sort of informal online setting, I do think it's important that students at least know who it is that's instructing them. And so you'll see me coming to you here from my garage with my Detroit Tigers flag proudly displayed. Don't worry, I do cheer for the Astros. Detroit's so bad, not even worth it. So I digress. We need to get down to business. And so, what I want to explain is just the general format of this course first. This is what we call an asynchronous online course. And what that means is that there are no set dates or meeting times. You are never ever going to have to be online for a Zoom lecture at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. And so the way that this class works actually is it works on a weekly basis. And I post the material for you at a reasonable time within the week. The lecture materials are always up by Monday. Usually the discussion forums will be posted up on Monday afternoon. Sometimes I think I might have said in the syllabus, give me till Thursday, but it's always up by Monday at 5 p.m. But basically everything is going to get posted up for you on a weekly basis, and then it's your job throughout the week to work through that material. And you can do that in your own time. If you want to sit down and dedicate a lot of time in one day to it and knock it all out, that is your prerogative. If you choose to spread it out and treat it like it were a face-to-face course where there were actual set times during the week that you work on it, then that is also your prerogative. It's entirely up to you how you choose to access this material. That being said, you do need to access the material in order to do well in and pass this class. So the way that it's going to work is my lectures are, I give you two options here. Well, I shouldn't say options. I post PowerPoint lectures. That's sort of the first lecture you're responsible for dealing with every week. And those are usually pretty detailed. They have a lot of images in them that sort of demonstrate graphs and charts. Things that I'm talking about, maps, are going to be particularly important in a history class. But I post those up. They're rather detail-oriented, and it's your job to work through those. And those are required facets of the course. Everything that you need to know about a weekly lecture will be found in the PowerPoint lecture. And so you have to work through those and work through the required readings that are listed in the syllabus every week. You have a textbook. It's actually an ebook, and it's what we call an open access textbook. This is very good news for you because what it means is it's free. Some of you might have looked in the bookstore or at the bookstore's website and saw that there was no material listed for the course. That is as it should be. Nobody needs to buy anything for this course. I put a link right in the syllabus. I'll also post it up to our Blackboard page here in the first week. And all you got to do is click on that link and it will give you access. Your e-textbook will be right there on the webpage. It's published by Rice University. It's called U.S. History by an author named Corbett and then a handful of other editors and contributors. So we always call it Corbett et al., meaning everybody else, fancy Latin. And so that and the PowerPoint lectures are all you have to work through on a weekly basis. However, I do find that many students in the past have benefited from lecture videos, like the one we're going to do right here. And this will just give you a little taste. Nothing I say in today's video is going to be testable material, and I will be talking a little bit about U.S. history, but this is nothing you're going to see on an examination. So really what's going to happen with those video lectures is they're not required, but they're optional. If you find that it's a helpful resource for you to have me sit there and listen to a talking head like me droning on about the weekly topic in the lecture, then that's something that might be, I, again, have found it very helpful to students in the past. Because in these video lectures, what I tend to do is I kind of cut through a lot of the superfluous information to get down to the really important points that I want you to take away from the copious amount of detailed information that's in the PowerPoint lecture. And so there I really zero in on what needs to be done and what we need to pull out of that particular lecture. What we're going to look at is really a lot of times in history, it's patterns and sort of interrelationships between different events, patterns of cause and effect. And also what I am a real stickler for is significance. Everything is technically something that happened in the past. And so it doesn't make it all worth studying. It doesn't make it all worth talking about in a university history class. I got up this morning, brushed my teeth, and I didn't shave, as you could probably tell. Got my COVID beard going. So that's not history. No one cares. No one is ever going to want to read about me getting up and brushing my teeth. we look at things that have historical significance, and that tends to be what I zero in on in these video lectures, is I'll expound upon why this is so important in American history, and I kind of gloss over the details in these videos because I'm going to leave the PowerPoint lectures to give you that information. So again, there will be nothing new that's not said in the PowerPoint lectures and these video lectures, but I am going to, in a lot of ways, it's going to be phrased differently. It's going to be presented differently, and it is definitely something that people find to be a useful resource. I try to keep these videos short. This one's going to be pretty long because I'm doing my whole, hey, look at this, look at that, welcome to the class, and I want to talk a little bit about history. You got to give me that. So I try to keep them short because research shows people don't pay attention to talking heads on screens like this for very long. So I am never successful in that goal. I sometimes will break the videos up into short, like here's a 5-minute, I'm just going to talk about one subject. And then other times I'll just say, here's a 45-minute lecture. I want to talk about all these interrelated, weave together kind of things. And so that's just something that is going to be a necessary sort of facet of our course. So I think I'm done talking about the lectures. That's how it's going to work. I'll post those up every week, and you just have to access them by Sunday. Now, there's one other weekly thing that I do want to bring out in this video, and I'm really trying my best to keep it short. So, the discussion forums. I talk about them in the syllabus. You can get all the key details there. But the discussion forums are the only weekly assessment that you're responsible for. It's the only thing that's going to happen on pretty much every week. You're going to have one of those. And so I will post up a discussion question. You are responsible for giving me a paragraph long response. So I'm not going to drone on. I talk a lot in the syllabus about plagiarism, and it's very important that you don't plagiarize at any point in this course. In the discussion forums, in the exams, where the written sections of the exams, or in your papers. I'll drone on about that at a different point in some other video this semester. But that is one arena where you could fall prey to it. But this is a paragraph-long response to a question that I post every week, and you just need to base it on the textbook reading. You have to give me a specific in-text citation, and I will give you examples of that before your first post is due in. But I post those up early in the week, and then you are responsible for responding to that question by 11:59 p.m. every Sunday night. The way it works is it's a credit or no credit grade for every submission that you put in on a weekly basis. And at the end of the semester, if you have 10 credited responses, you get 100% for your discussion forum portion of the grade. 9 responses credited would get you 90%. 8 is 80%. 7 is so on and so forth. 5 or fewer contributions to those discussion forums will result in a 0 for that portion of your grade. You're not even meeting half the expectation that's laid out in the syllabus, so no credit will be given on that. So the discussion forums are due weekly. We have 3 exams over the course of the semester. They'll be made up of true, false, multiple choice, and a short answer section. So I find the short answers, I call them term IDs. I will talk about them at a later date. It's sort of discussed in the syllabus. And those are sort of the writing component of your exams. I find them more useful than long essays. I'm going to give you a handful, maybe 7 or 8 term IDs to answer, and that's sort of like the writing portion of your exams. In addition to that, we're going to have a paper due this semester. We'll talk about that at a later date in the interest of sort of speeding through this. And then you can find all my expectations, deadlines, due dates, and our course schedule right there in the syllabus. So I've also posted up some documents about contacting me, general email etiquette, where I'm kind of just chiding everybody and making sure you're using professional etiquette in your emails. That's just something that I'm kind of a stickler for, and it does tend to help students in their professional and educational careers moving forward. Beyond that, I think that's all I really need to say about the course and its delivery method. If you ever have questions about anything, what's really important is that you be proactive. Email me whenever a question comes up. If you send a direct email, not through the Blackboard messaging system, but just an email to me at Davey, which is Davey, J at uhd.edu, and it's listed in the syllabus. That's the best way to get a hold of me. If I'm sitting there having dinner with my family, watching a ball game, doesn't matter. It comes right through to my phone, and if I'm able to answer it right on the spot, I will. So I try to be as responsive to you all as possible. And if it's something I have to think about for a little while, I'll take some time and sit down and write the email. I am available through Zoom for office hours this semester with the COVID thing. I won't be holding any physical office hours, but we can meet in a Zoom meeting. And so beyond that, I think that's kind of just the basis of how the class is going to work. All of this is kind of trial and error. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but we will work our way through it, and everyone will get familiar with it and used to it. So that's going to wrap up all my sort of bureaucratic logistical work there. And we can move into I want to make this like a 5-minute overview of U.S. history to 1865. And so, with this 5-minute overview, what I'm going to say is rather generalized, so forgive me for a lack of nuance if it comes off that way. So, obviously, the history of what is now the United States as a political entity and a nation state, it really probably begins somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 years ago, depending on your sort of belief in a couple of different theories about migration to the New World, or to the Americas in general. So the most sort of commonly accepted theory, although there is every year new evidence coming out that's complicating both of these potential theories, human beings walked from Northeast Asia to what is today not basically like Alaska. They came down through Canada and entered the United States in modern day Montana. That was the old common accepted theory. They called it the Bering Land Bridge theory. And it just says a land bridge opened up, they were able to cross over. And then also, really, what's happening is Canada back in the day was completely covered in a 2-mile thick sheet of ice. And an opening in this ice formed, and they were able to walk through into what is now the United States. So that is human migration. Obviously, the people who came here from East Asia, there's other theories that say they came by boat. But the whole idea is that people came from Northeast Asia and they became the foundations of Native American culture. A really critical shift happens around 9,000 years ago. Human beings start selectively cultivating, at least human beings in the Americas, start selectively cultivating wild crops. They say, I like this corn better than that corn, so I'm going to clear all the corn I don't like to give space to the corn I do like. Not truly settled agriculture, but it's a pivot in that direction. This is known as the Archaic Age of Native American cultures. So the biggest shift in the societies of the Americas and the indigenous cultures that were here is that in the Valley of Mexico, right around 5,000 years ago, Mesoamerican cultures started to practice truly settled agriculture. And so they would become there's a reason that you see the greatest, when I should not use such loaded terminology, the largest and most visible empires of the New World at that point in time, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltec, the ones who are building these massive stone cities. They are the ones who are there's no coincidence that that's the first area that we see Native Americans practicing settled agriculture, where they're creating a food surplus so that their people can practice specialization. If I don't have to worry about where my steak comes from at night or where I get my potatoes, well, at the end of the day, it leaves me free to sit around and talk to you about American history. So that's how specialization occurs in those societies, and the societies of the Americas become notedly more complex from that point forward. And so you have a lot of different sort of social systems, religious systems, economic systems, and social stratification in the Americas. You have groups like the sort of Eastern Woodlands people. This would be mostly Algonquin and Iroquois people. They stretch from northeast Canada all the way down to Florida, northern Florida. And so this group generally lived in decentralized sort of communities. They had a real diffuse structure of power, generally granted to the oldest people. They were very egalitarian. They made democratic decisions. And they lived in small, nomadic, semi-nomadic type of clans. And so they were able, their construction was not supremely sophisticated because that was not what they needed. They would move in these, you see the teepees and the wigwams and the longhouses. The idea is that I can either pick it up or move it, or if I don't feel like carrying it with me, I leave it and I can rebuild it wherever I'm going. So it's not that they were incapable of knowing how to work with stone and building great cities like you see with the Aztecs in Tenochtitlan, with the Olmec and the Toltec and the Mayan ruins that we see today, these large stone cities. The people in the northeast of the United States, the climate and the game animals didn't really allow for that. They had to move, they got to be mobile. And so that's why their construction is not stone, it's generally wood, bark, animal skins, things that can be either discarded or moved easily. It's all sort of necessity. You have different examples of people living in sort of relation to nature here. And then essentially, you could take a look at like Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Aztec Empire. They're harvesting, or really they're channeling the waters of Lake Texcoco, and they're basically using that for irrigation and travel. They've just harnessed the power of this watery environment they're in to make commerce and agriculture much easier. Then you go out to a place like the American Southwest because we have a lot of diverse climates. Places like Arizona, New Mexico, they're deserts. There you saw different sorts of Native American units, living units, and family arrangements. Out there, the resources are scarce. You got to make do with very little, and obviously it's real hot and real dry. And so what you tend to see there is they have social patterns, like they practice a form of marriage where a wife takes many husbands. What this does is it cuts down on the society's reproductive rate, so they don't put a stress on the resources around them. So we see a lot of diversity in the Native American cultures, but clearly we know that they are the ones here first. They are America's first people. And then you have, you can kind of go back in 1000 Common Era. You have Vikings sort of interacting off the islands of northeast Canada, up in Nova Scotia and areas like that. You have remnants in Lance Meadows. In Canada, where they've dug out Viking excavations, Norman excavations. And so we do see some early travel to that northern part. But we have Columbus, 1492. The Americas are sort of reimagined and rediscovered in Europe's mind. And that's when we start to see European colonization. All the different nations of Europe poured into America, and they ultimately, the Americas, and then also what we are going to call the United States. You had in the United States alone, the Spanish Empire had control of Florida, the lower part of the Mississippi Valley, which was always in contention with France, who technically claimed the entire Mississippi Valley up in the north, going up towards the Great Lakes region. All that belonged to France. You had originally Dutch settlement in New York City. That the Dutch were the first people in there. It used to be called New Netherlands, and the city was New Amsterdam. And then in 1630s, the British come along and they take that. And of course, we have English speakers in the British settlement, mostly confined to the east coast of the United States. So these colonial nations are all fighting and vying with each other, trying to get more people here. English speakers tend to win out in what is now the mainland United States simply through power by numbers. Whereas the French and the Spanish were not particularly concerned with the number of the European people they had within their settlements. They were a little more concerned about money. England is trying to recreate England in America. That's why we have an area called New England. And so what we're seeing here is they're coming and putting in more settlers than anybody else, and their populations are growing at an exponential rate. And so they kind of are just outnumbering their other neighbors. And so these colonists, at some point in the 1760s, after an event known as the French Indian War, England was broke, and they spent a lot of money protecting these colonists here in America. Well, these colonists didn't want to pay their fair share in taxes, per se. They paid less per capita than everybody else in the British Empire at that point in time. And the British, just having fought this very costly war, the French Indian War was just the North American theater of a much larger conflict known as the 7 Years' War in Europe. And so England's broke after this war. They're trying to get some of their money back, and their way of doing that is taxing the American colonists at a higher rate. Well, the American colonists decide they don't like this, and that it's not fair, that they don't get representation in British government, but they are being taxed, and their money's being used for the public good. And so that's sort of the narrative history of the United States. There's a lot more going on than just that. You have the sort of I, this idea of the social contract and the right of the governed to decide who governs them. This idea of individual sovereignty and individual and inalienable rights that come out of the Enlightenment are all entrenched within the concepts that drive American colonists towards revolution. As we know, that war sort of really jumps off in 1776, goes all, well, technically starts in 1775, the real conflict. But it goes all the way up to 1783 when England finally recognizes a new nation, the United States of America, on paper. Now, I'm going to give you just the quickest wrap up I can of the 19th century in America. You have two major things happening at once: westward expansion, that's the biggest one, and you can't really even separate the two. Along with westward expansion, we have the issue of slavery. Slavery is, from the very beginning in this country, one of the biggest points of contention between two regions that had drastically different views on the issue. You can pretty much guess where we're going with this. It's called the Civil War. But what's happening here in the 1800s is that as America makes the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and they move west and get pretty much the entire middle third of America, they are going to have to move over there, and now the North has already outlawed slavery in most of those states. In the South, it's legal. Very little of the discussion about slavery in 19th century America revolved around whether it should or shouldn't be legal in Alabama or New York. That was already well settled. That was well established. They're looking now at what happens when we acquire this new territory, and that's what creates the fight and the tension. Every time America moves west, the issue of slavery comes up. And America's very, very land hungry at this time. So we have the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. They're basically going to annex, in a lot of ways, as sort of an under the table sort of invasion of Florida, and they take Florida from the Spanish because Florida simply doesn't have the military power there to defend it. And then in obviously, I think as you all know pretty well, in the 1830s, the Texans are going to fight for their independence against the Spanish. Well, at that point, independent Mexican government under Santa Anna. And so when Texas gains its independence in the 1830s, it applies for statehood. America fights for almost a decade, and finally it lets Texas in 1845. So the story of the 19th century is all about westward expansion and the conflict over slavery. Of course, this all culminates in Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, and before he even takes office in 1861, South Carolina is going to stand up in Congress and say, "We secede from the United States of America," and the rest of the southern and most of the slaveholding territories are going to follow them. There's four that don't. You have Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland are the border states. They all have slaves, but they stay in the Union. The rest of the slaveholding states leave and become part of the Confederate States of America. 4 years of war would ensue after that. And of course, we know this cost about 650,000 American lives on both sides. But then when it all comes to an end, we are now sitting there on top of a very suspect document that was issued by President Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation. This is issued in 1862. It goes into effect in 1863. But what most people don't know is that it does nothing to adjudicate slavery in America. It says nothing about slavery in America. It says slavery in secessionist Confederate states. It frees slaves in the Confederate States, and this is a very flimsy legal document because how can the President of the U.S. issue a document for a bunch of states that no longer recognize U.S. sovereignty? So Lincoln moves very, very quickly, along with both moderate and radical Republicans in Congress, with the Republican Party having come up to abolish slavery, and eliminate it from American soil. And ultimately, what Lincoln is going to do is secure the 13th Amendment. This outlaws slavery and indentured servitude in the United States, but there is a caveat. That caveat is important. I know I'm going into more detail now, but we're going to be talking about this in Reconstruction. If you are convicted of a crime, then you can be put into slavery in the United States or some form of indentured servitude. In other words, we can make you work for free. And this is going to be used by the states in the South during the Reconstruction era when they're trying to regain admission to the United States. They are going to find loopholes in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And that is really where our course is going to pick up, is in the Reconstruction era. And we are going to pick up, really, I think this is one of the most important eras, particularly as we see the ongoing issues over social justice, race relationships, equality in America, the status of different citizens based on their particular demographic group. These are things that are really, really in very, very close inspection right now. This is something that everybody is paying attention to. Well, in a lot of ways, what we're seeing today is the holdovers from everything we're going to be talking about in this course. They're holdovers from failures of the Reconstruction era. They are holdovers from the failure of the federal government in a lot of ways to stop the reestablishment of the antebellum South, the reestablishment of a plantation culture and a plantation mentality. And then also, that is not to say that there aren't very, very clear and obvious race problems that we're going to be looking at in the North, too. But it's the long struggle for equality throughout the late 19th and 20th century that is where our class picks up. And so that is where I'm going to end this lecture video. I hope you're all doing very well. It was nice to meet you, for whatever that's worth, on a video screen remotely. But if you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to talk to me about, feel free to give me a jingle through email. You can send me a message through Blackboard messaging. I will respond eventually, but it takes me a while, I got to admit. I'll try to be more responsive to that this semester, but it's always best to just send me a direct email. It comes right through on my phone. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I really look forward to working with you all this semester.